about the relationship of enlightenment to freedom and ease of being.
Right.
If one has a sense that freedom is, that there is endless possibilities, there are no boundaries, and that leads to a sense of elation and joy.
It is elation and joy.
Yeah.
It is elation and joy.
But you were saying earlier that this thing about bliss doesn't belong with, well, actually, it's not bliss. It is elation and joy.
It is elation and joy. It is. Yeah. That's what its nature is.
Okay, good.
Well, no, because I ask anybody here, if you contemplate the nature of consciousness, which is what we're all doing here, if you assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, then you're going to be contemplating what is the nature of consciousness. You contemplate the nature of consciousness, how are you going to feel? Joy, lightness of being. Enlightenment is lightness of being. Joy and lightness of being. Enlightenment is lightness of being. Joy and lightness of being is what you will experience, I guarantee. If you contemplate the nature of consciousness, and you do so consistently, you contemplate the nature of consciousness and do so consistently, what are you going to experience? Joy and lightness of being. So, it's unmistakable. Okay. So why has the art and science of stillness, the art and science of meditation, why is it a time-tested, why is it this perennial mystical position, this perennial mystical practice? It's because it's the direct route to awakening to the nature of consciousness. So the nature of consciousness itself is joy, lightness of being. That's what its nature is. So the nature of so human beings who are supposed to be enlightened, their personality generally should be an expression of lightness of being. You know, not necessarily in every single second, but most of the time, joy and lightness of being. Because they have awoken to the nature of consciousness, their own consciousness, and so the reflection of that is joy and lightness of being. But everybody here, you examine for yourself. But you have to be very careful here. What I'm talking about is not what your mind is telling you about what's happening between you and your mind. The nature of consciousness is the nature of consciousness, is the nature of consciousness. It's not what anybody says about it, including what your mind says about it. It's what its nature is. Right? So what's the nature of ice cream? Sweetness. Right? Ice cream is sweet. So anybody can say, no, it's not. Yes, because it's what its nature. Its true nature is very sweet. So the nature of consciousness is joy and lightness of being. But you have to see for yourself. But don't mistake the nature of consciousness with, with your mind going up, down, left, right, in, out, and all over the place, which is different. That's your mind doing gymnastics, acrobatics. And that's what the mind does. The mind is a mechanical, it's machinery. So that's how it's work. So don't mistake the movement of the machinery of your mind to be the nature of consciousness. I'm talking about something else. So all of that machinery is moving about within an infinite ground, which is consciousness itself. And I'm talking about the nature of the ground itself, not what appears to be happening within it, which in any given moment could be, some bizarre fantasy, some weird memory, some meaningless, musings about nothing, or some apparently relevant thoughts about whatever it is. I'm not talking about any of that at all. None of that. So none of that is the nature of consciousness. That all has to do with the content of consciousness. I'm talking about the nature of consciousness itself, which is the ground upon which all that's happening. So when you assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, and you assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, and you assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, the result's going to be joy and lightness of being, because the nature of consciousness is joy and lightness of being. When you compulsively identify with the content of consciousness, if you think about happy things, that which makes you feel happy, right? Your husband, your wife, your daughter, your son, your mother, your father, or if all those images make you happy, then you think about them, it'll make you feel happy. Or if all those thoughts make you feel miserable and terrible, then thinking about those objects will make you feel miserable and terrible. So I'm not talking about how we feel when we think about objects in consciousness that make us feel happy, or objects in consciousness that make us feel sad. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ground of your experiences, which is not an object. So the ground of your experience is not an object. So the nature of that ground in your own experience is joy. So and how do I know that? Because if you do have no relationship to the content of consciousness, to whatever, if you do, and you consistently do, you will find that your experience is one of joy and lightness of being. Your experience won't be one of joy and lightness of being if you're thinking about your relationship to the content of consciousness. If you think about your relationship to the content of consciousness, then your ego is saying, I wasn't doing it right, or I did it really great, or something like this. Then you're thinking about your relationship to the content of consciousness. You're not having no relationship to the content of consciousness. But if you do assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, the result's going to be joy and lightness of being. I guarantee it. It works every single time. It never, ever, ever fails.
You were talking about the immediacy of experience yesterday.
The immediacy of enlightened awareness.
Yeah, and I'm finding that's also part of the
equation.
Yes, that's right. There's a great
immediacy enlightened awareness
before even the mind has no place there.
No,
either,
exactly.
so.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, the awakening to the nature of consciousness itself, the lightness of being, which is the nature of consciousness, is enlightened awareness. That's exactly one and the same thing.
Thanks a lot.
Very good. That's very good. That's very good. Isn't it, Joe, good? Isn't it fantastic?
It's marvelous.
Isn't it marvelous?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
There you go. It's marvelous. Yeah. Every time, right?
Yep.
Every single time.
Yep.
That's why they say, ever new, Sat Chit Ananda, ever new, being, consciousness, bliss.
Never ending.
Ever new. That's what they say, ever new, being, consciousness, bliss, every time, right? Amazing.
Yeah.
So if you assume no relationship to the content of consciousness, your experience will be joy and lightness of being. If you don't, your experience won't be joy and lightness of being. Very simple. How simple could that be? Could it be any simpler? I ask you. Could it be simpler? I don't think so.